It's none of your business, but I suppose it makes no difference if I tell a bunch of lowly worms like this lot. He's a familiar. Eyes rounded in astonishment, and knives halted in mid-air, skewered with sausages and drippings. Hrifa scowled enviously and demanded, "Where'd you get him? I don't think that's fair. The Maestari will never put up with it. Apprentices aren't allowed familiars. How'd you ever pay for one? They're frightfully dear, I've heard. You practically have to ransom your soul to some wizard or demon to get one. But I can't figure out who would want your soul, Agnar." "You seem to forget," Agnar replied in a bored tone. "I was born in Clan Galder of chosen parentage." "Galder isn't a real clan," Hrifa snorted. "It's only a sept. It's nothing so special as you'd like to believe. There's just as many cow-herders and wool-dyers in Galder as in any other sub-clan." "Perhaps, but there are definitely more wizards," Agnar shot back. "And far better wizards, one of which I hope and expect to become one day." Hrifa glowered at him. "Give me back my breakfast. That's no familiar. Knowing you, it's just another joke." "Take it back if you dare," Agnar invited. Hrifa reached out his hand, but Scuggy planted one clawed paw on the edge of the plate to defend his breakfast, and growled softly, watching Hrifa from the corner of his eye. Hrifa jerked his hand back, and the younger apprentices laughed jeeringly. In a generous humor, Agnar gave part of his own breakfast to Hrifa, a rather small part, though. When the food was done away with, Bjarnadr swept into the hall, already spewing forth instructions, reprimands, and encouragements couched in threatening terms, as well as administering his knuckles to a few boyish skulls in passing. "What is that?" He suddenly halted, stock still, as his gaze fell upon Agnar and Scuggy. "A cat, Maestari," Agnar replied respectfully. Bjarnadr clasped his hands behind his back. "A cat, you say? Thank you for that information, Agnar." The apprentices sniggered. Scuggy was occupied with washing his immaculate white paws and did not deign to even glance at Bjarnadr. "He's a familiar," Agnar said as casually as he could. "Indeed? And where did you get him?" "At Finn's Inn, from a traveling magic merchant." "I see. And with what did you pay the merchant? I hadn't noticed you were so wealthy." The apprentices began exchanging knowing glances and nudging each other. Agnar ignored them, replying, "We agreed that I should pay him later if I would give him a small surety now. All he wanted was a lock of my hair." Bjarnadr inhaled a deep breath, raising his eyes to the ceiling. He spoke gently with admirable restraint. "Did it not occur to you that by giving a part of your person to this stranger that he will gain a certain degree of power over you, depending upon his skill? Perhaps he will some day sell that lock of hair to one of your many enemies when you are an adept wizard, enemies who will then be able to do you great harm." "He seemed an honest fellow," Agnar answered. "And a trusting one to have given a lowly apprentice such a valuable familiar," Bjarnadr went on. "Did he tell you the cat's name? Was it Boots, or Mittens, or Stripe?" "I can't tell you his name," Agnar said. "That's for me alone to know." "The familiar tells you his true name, not something a traveling trash merchant tells you. Agnar, this charlatan has sold you nothing but an ordinary cat in exchange for what could be your entire future as a wizard. You've been completely duped and made a fool of by that fellow, as well as this ridiculous, overfed, lascivious, hairy beast." He ended with a shattering sneeze and dabbed at his reddening eyes, while the other apprentices whooped with mirth. Hrifa grinned with wicked satisfaction, rubbing his knuckles, no doubt plotting where he would waylay Agnar for his revenge. Agnar stole a sidewise glance at Scuggy, who was still washing himself. "He hears and understands you perfectly," he said. "You'd better not insult him." Bjarnadr sneezed again. "He's nothing but a fur-bearing nuisance, and fat and stupid." Scuggy began washing his hind foot, seemingly oblivious, and the apprentices added their own epithets, all to no effect. Scuggy ignored them all with supreme contempt. For a moment, Agnar felt a small doubt nibbling at his confidence. "There, you see, he didn't understand a bit of it," Bjarnadr declared triumphantly. "You've been cheated. Now I strongly suggest you get rid of him. Besides, he makes me sneeze." 2 more rapid-fire sneezes followed. Supposing he were a familiar, how would one go about learning his name? Agnar pursued stubbornly. The names of all things are contained somewhere within them, Björnadr answered, quaking with suppressed sneezes. You can discover his true name if you're diligent and observant, and if indeed he's got one. Now let's proceed with our experiments. He sneezed and stalked away, wiping his nose and glaring back at Scuggy. Today we're summoning a minor fire elemental, and hopefully containing him while we stand safely within our rune rings. I hope you've all studied the procedures adequately. One final sneeze almost blew his hood off. Agnar eyed Scuggy suspiciously. It seemed to him that Scuggy uttered a little mutter for each sneeze, and he certainly smiled as if Björnadr's sneezing amused him. He rubbed his chin on Agnar's hand and purred. With breakfast and bathing taken care of, he curled up on Agnar's cloak amongst his magical apparatus on the table and went to sleep, exhausted by his heavy responsibilities. The day went from bad to worse immediately. Agnar scratched his rune ring on the floor around himself, reciting the proper words, but the elemental got to him anyway, buffeting him around and setting his clothes on fire. Björnadr banished the elemental, the other students laughed, and Scuggy watched from the safety of the rafters. In the uproar, Agnar heard an unfamiliar voice croak some words, and suddenly the fire elemental returned. A huge, roaring ball of flame caught everyone defenseless, including Björnadr. The apprentices fled in terror while the master stood and hurled firebolts and shouted spells. By the time the fire elemental was banished, the entire hall was blackened. Lessons were cancelled for the day to clean up the mess, and Björnadr was in a frightful humor. He stalked around looking for Agnar, snorting smoke. Is this your idea of a joke? He roared. A fire elemental is nothing to play games with. Someone might have been fired. Agnar, I know you're responsible for this. Wisely, Agnar took Scuggy and hid in the top of an abandoned tower. The old fortress was large enough to afford him several secret hiding places, where he went to escape the wrath of Björnadr or the idiocy of the other apprentices. With a groan, he threw himself down on the improvised bed of moldy hay. At once, Scuggy made a mattress of Agnar's stomach, turning around a few times before settling down to purring and flexing his claws. Why won't you speak to me? Agnar rubbed Scuggy's ears to awaken him. If you had helped me, I wouldn't have conjured that elemental. It was some of my finest work, though. A pity I wasn't expecting it. Come on, Scuggy, or whatever your true name is. I need some help or I'll get sacked for good. Scuggy bestowed one reassuring lick to Agnar's hand and rose up to tromp out a more comfortable resting place on Agnar's stomach. Curling himself up tightly, he went to sleep and refused to respond to Agnar's questioning with anything but a sleepy grumble. A bar of warm sunlight soon made Agnar too lazy to worry about any of his problems, and he too went to sleep, with Scuggy coiled up in the middle of him like a large stone. When he awakened around midday, hungry, Scuggy was stretched out full length beside him in the sun, sleeping with his orange-spotted white belly turned upward. It was a fascinating pattern of dots and bars. Agnar ran his hand down Scuggy's belly, and Scuggy stretched luxuriously, making his belly spots look even more like runic writing and fur. Suddenly remembering what the Maestari had said about names being found on the creature in question, Agnar tried to stretch Scuggy out again to get another look at the pattern, but Scuggy took umbrage at such liberties and writhed and kicked indignantly with both hind legs. His dignity much ruffled, he commenced grooming himself from head to toe with obvious exasperation, as if he had been disfigured almost beyond recognition. Agnar watched and smiled, congratulating himself. His Galdr heritage assured him that his instincts were good, and his instincts told him that Scuggy's true name was written on his stomach. He was also certain that he had recognized the middle two letters of the name. The days that followed were not easy. Björnadr got over his temper as soon as the hall was cleaned up, but not for long. At mealtime, when Agnar attempted a simple come-hither spell to slide the bread within his reach, the loaf flew into the air and landed with a splash in someone else's soup, and the knife whirled in a deadly gleaming disc, straight toward Björnadr at the head of the table. He plucked it out of the air with a well-directed firebolt, but he was not amused. Agnar was sentenced to kitchen duty for a week. In addition to his regular lessons, kitchen duty added 2 hours onto each end of his day, besides doing away with the afternoon digestive period directly after the midday meal. Scuggy faithfully accompanied him in his disgrace, and thrashed any ordinary cats he saw, and helped himself to the leftover scraps. By the end of the week he was so fat that the letters of his stomach were further apart than ever. Disaster seemed to stalk Agnar. Simple spells that he had once mastered exploded in his face, and spells that he had never dreamed of seemed to leap off his fingertips, and they always backfired in the most hideous way possible. Bjarnardur retained his temper with great and visible difficulty, even though it cost him 2 cloaks and a complete new gown and hood and sleeves. He hovered over Agnar, watching him, which was borrowing trouble. The sneezing recurred at Bjarnardur's most important moments, when he was explaining a complicated concept, or scolding an apprentice, or working a spell, thus completely destroying the effect. Agnar's errant magical powers attacked Bjarnardur when he was occupied with something else and caught completely off guard. Even Agnar was frightened by the menace of his own sorcery, but try as he might to get it right, the words always came out wrong. He thought about the hairlock he had traded away, wondering who possessed it now. The final straw was the day Agnar's shape-shifting spell momentarily converted Bjarnardur to a skinny black goat. Luckily, the spell did not stick, but it made the apprentices hilarious and Bjarnardur furious. "It's that blasted cat," he roared. "Nothing has gone right since you brought him here. If I see that beast one more time, Agnar, there won't be enough of either of you to send to the Rag and Bone Man." "But he's helping me," Agnar protested. "I've just got to polish my skills a bit." "I'll polish your head with my staff." Bjarnardur waved it, trailing clouds of ominous black smoke, and Agnar grabbed Scuggy and fled to his tower retreat, with Scuggy yowling and kicking at such undignified treatment. "Scuggy, I don't know what's going to happen to us if you don't tell me your name." Agnar glared at Scuggy, who was stretching out in the sunshine for a nap. "But right now your name is Trouble and mine is Mud." He leaned on the window ledge to peer down at the mossy roof of the great hall below. If he were sent home to his clansmen in disgrace, it would be worse than having his articles of apprenticeship sold to some common tradesman. Gloomily he pictured himself apprenticed to a woodcutter, a shipbuilder, a slaughterer, or a blacksmith. "Cheer up, it's not that bad," said a voice behind him, and he whirled around in outrage to see who had tracked him to his favorite secret place. All he saw was Scuggy, half asleep and looking at him with one eye open. He plunged to the doorway and looked out, expecting another trick from some of the younger apprentices. The narrow, winding stair was dark and empty. "Scuggy," he said, and Scuggy began to purr, rolling over to get a bit more comfortable. "I've guessed your secret name. It is Trouble, isn't it? Trufla in the old tongue. I ought to have guessed it from the way you've messed up my magic spells and playing tricks on Bjarnardur. All I can say is thanks a lot for ruining my life. Some familiar you turned out to be." Scuggy opened both eyes and sat up, with some difficulty. His speaking voice was squeaky, a bit hoarse, like his meowing voice. "It wasn't my fault, old boy. It's that wizard you bought me from. You've heard of Mord Corpse Eater in your lessons, I presume, one of the most powerful of the Dokalfar wizards." Agnar gaped in amazement. "That was Mord Corpse Eater? He seemed an ordinary traveling merchant to me." "He's an old enemy of Bjarnardur's. He's the one who's been sending your spells awry against Bjarnardur. And yes, he's been using me, and you, to do it, thanks to your generous gift of a hairlock. Unless you stop him, he'll kill your master, or put him into some shape he can't get out of for a long while." "How can you tell me this? Doesn't Mord hear you?" "No longer. Now that you've found my true name, I'm freed from him and bound to help you. He's not going to be pleased that you found out my name. He never expected you'd be able to, you know, and frankly, neither did I." Agnar struck an offended pose, still congratulating himself on his unexpected good fortune. "Didn't you now? After all, I come from the Galder clan." Nervously, he added, "What do you think he'll do?" "Oh, he's going to get ugly now. But don't worry, I'm going to help you. Right after I take a nap." "Nap? Scuggy, not now. Or should I say Trufla?" All right, we'll talk. There's little else to do until Bjarnardur cools off." Agnar avoided Bjarnardur for the rest of the day, but Bjarnardur still had not cooled down by the midday following. He peered down at the hall and cocked his ears. Too much black smoke and shouting still issued from the great hall, and the loud thwacks and yelps from the apprentices did not bode well for his return. So Agnar practiced the spells he knew, and some new ones with Scuggy prompting him, and they came off flawlessly.